Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Games Up podcast. My name is Cameron, and his name is Lewis.
Hello.
How are you?
Just that noise.
Just that.
Uh,
That good, huh?
yeah.
Good week?
Yeah. Yeah, well in all. Good week.
Good. Glad to hear it. We are recording this on Easter, and it'll be coming out on Easter Monday. So if you celebrate it, happy Easter. Merry chocolate and or Jesus. If you celebrate it. If you don't, I don't know. Happy Monday or whatever. It's a bank holiday, so that's good. Let's not dilly anymore. Let's get in with the news. The news starts this week with perhaps my favourite story in quite a while. The Tomb Raider 123 remake is not happening after all because the developer that was going to make it thought they owned the IP, but it turns out they don't.
Yeah, so this was a great news story. You saw how excited I was about it before. Essentially, these guys worked on the mobile port, and from that they thought that they were able to release anything they wanted to do with Tomb Raider 1 and 2 and 3, in spite of not actually talking to Square Enix or anyone. Just they thought they had announced that they were remastering it.
I absolutely love this because imagine, like, they must have been like, "Oh, hey guys, they're announcing Shadow of the Tomb Raider Day. We should announce our remake. Have we mentioned this to anyone? We okay? Yeah, it'll be fine. What's the worst that could happen? We're only remaking one of the biggest franchises in video gaming without anyone's permission."
Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking, and quite rightly. I mean, they got shut down, and you know,
You know what? I hope they just do it. I hope they release it later this year. They're like, "Fuck them. We're just making it."
yeah. I mean, like, I'd love to play it. I know it's not really going to happen otherwise, but at the same time, it's like as a fan project, maybe as like an actual sellable thing. Nah.
I mean, I'm sure there are fan projects online. There's fan projects for basically every game in existence. There's one for Battlefront 2 for Christ's sake. So there's probably one for this. But I absolutely love this. This is easily my favorite story of the week. Which is difficult because the second story is also a favorite of mine. Red Faction Guerrilla is real. It is being remastered. It's being remastered.
Yeah, remastered.
Get it? Because they're on Mars. Right, and it's a remaster. It's funny.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this actually, and I know you are too. I really enjoyed this game, and I've heard that they're working on the physics, going to make it a bit nicer. Yeah, and they're obviously updating the textures. Yeah, so I'm well up for that game.
Very, very up for it. Concerned that it's out this quarter and there's no like trailers or screenshots or anything.
Yeah, I can see why you'd be concerned, but I think like it's not too unusual for the remastered in the remastered space to be kind of less quick with that sort of less advertising, less
To be fair to them, they could stick a 360 a Red Faction Guerrilla 360 disc in the case and I'd still buy it. So.
Yeah, and if you already have the game, it's being given for free on Steam, which means that I will play it for free. I'm very much looking forward to playing through it again. I tried replaying through it recently, and then I kind of stopped when I heard this news. So, yeah,
it's a great game. If you haven't picked it up before, pick it up now. It's so good. It's so much fun. It's one of the best destruction games I've ever played, and this will be them testing the waters for like, do we make another? Kind of crap to give into that bollocks technique, but we do want another. So, number 3 this week, Paragon, Epic's game that failed in the multiplayer space. And tried to go after Overwatch. There's a whole story there that we didn't cover. Look into it if you want to. It's really interesting. Paragon has released all of its assets onto the Unreal Engine for free. Now, they said they were going to do this when they shut down the game. The game, they said, was dying. They weren't going to try and save it. They were just going to let it die. They were going to turn the servers off, but they were going to put the assets online for free. And as you've noted here, Lewis, it's a great shame because these assets are really, really nice. There's some very high-quality models, animations, sound effects, textures, and it's all on Unreal for free. So a couple of notes here. Firstly, if you're wanting to develop video games, don't just like steal the assets. Obviously, try and build them yourself or try and customize them, make them fit your game world. But they are on the Unreal Engine to be played with and used. That's awesome. Secondly, if you're in education, I'm pretty sure you can still get the Unreal Engine for free in education. They gave it away to universities and stuff, so now not only do you have the Unreal Engine for free, but you have a very high quality game for free, so look into that. If you're my students, please look into this, because this is great. You should be doing this, especially in your VFX stuff. And yeah, good on you, Epic.
Yeah, really good. And these, as you said, these assets are top notch. They're made for AAA. They are really high quality stuff, and it's very good that they're willing to put it onto their engine. And hopefully, someone makes something of it. I mean, obviously, with the way it is, it's unlikely that we'll see anything. But I'm sure in the kind of indie space, especially kind of like the homebrew game space, there'll be somebody that makes something interesting with these.
I guarantee you'll see something out of the indie space in Glasgow. Not in Glasgow, in Scotland. Sorry. There's a lot of games that come from education into the indie space in Scotland, especially around Abertay University. They're very, very big. We've interviewed some of their the devs that came out of there before, so I guarantee you there'll be something that uses this kind of tech there.
Okay.
Good stuff. In the second of the remastered stories, and easily the most important of the remastered stories this week, another one from THQ Nordic. They're going to be working with Nickelodeon to bring back old Nickelodeon games that THQ made. Firstly, so they're now just THQ. They are literally now just THQ. Secondly, this means that SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom is back, which is I haven't played it personally, but it's very much a fan favourite game. So, yay. More games.
Yeah, it's nice to see this, and it's nice to see kind of people happy over it. Something I kind of should have mentioned a little bit ago about the remastered thing for Red Faction. Obviously, that's THQ as well, or THQ Nordic that's doing it, in spite of the fact that they never got the original sales for that game. So I was quite surprised when I heard they were giving it out on Steam, considering that's nothing to them. They haven't received anything from that. It's kind of, I suppose, free advertising for if they do another Red Faction game. But yeah, they're now THQ basically.
Yeah, it's funny because THQ Nordic have this year been a better THQ than THQ were in the last 2 or 3 years that they existed. So that's quite good. I think we can slowly start to sort of write down some E3 predictions based on what they've been doing recently. I won't mention them, but I think there'd be some good money there. All right, next story this week is that EA are hiring for an open-world online Star Wars game. Somewhat interestingly, purely because EA are only ever hiring for open-world online games these days. But interestingly, this studio here is EA Canada, which is well known for making FIFA, NFL, or NBA stuff. So, is this a Star Wars sports game?
Yeah. So I think it's a persistent world game at the very least. It's kind of more in the line. I didn't note it down, but it's more in the line of something like Division, or maybe even kind of approaching something like Destiny, but not quite as it's not quite an MMO. It's more something for the persistent world. But who's to know for certain? I'm interested though, but at the same time, I'm worried.
I'm interested to a fault. I'm only kind of interested because it's Star Wars and it's open world, which is great. Those are a recipe for a good thing. The reason I'm not interested or not too worried at the minute is because EA have a habit of staffing up for a game and then releasing it 6 years later. So I don't know when we'll see this, especially if it's a new development team or a dev team being shifted, especially with it being online and open world. Those are two heavy resource things. I don't think we'll be seeing this anytime soon.
Especially because we can assume that by the fact that they're actually hiring, it should be said, actually for a manager as opposed to so this role that they're hiring for is actually for someone to oversee the project as opposed to say developers. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of puts an extra spin on it, an extra kind of strange feel about it, because you have to wonder whether then if that's the case, then maybe this might be quite a new team, even if it's not something kind of established or in their kind of comfort zone.
Yeah, so what you're saying is it doesn't seem like they're moving a team that's already formed over. They're reforming a team, whether it's from bits of the other. To add some context, the way a video game usually hires is you hire production people and managerial people first, so they oversee how it works and put the framework in place. Then you hire developers, artists, so on to make it happen. Then you sort of hire actors, mocap people, depending on what you're doing, character artists to some extent. Then sort of towards the middle and the end, you get marketing and writing, because writing happens surprisingly late on in the game dev world. You didn't know that?
No, I didn't know the writing happened late.
It doesn't happen like right at the end. It kind of happens middle to the end. And obviously you go in with an idea,
Yeah.
but exact story writing happens middle to the end, because then that way you know what assets are working, what are broken, what you can use, what you can't use. Basically, like, it means you don't write Arkham Asylum with 3 islands, because...
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. Interesting shit, though. Alright, the next one that's also interesting shit is that Lego The Incredibles got announced this week, which means... I don't know what it means, but it means it's fantastic. We're getting a Lego game this year, and it's got The Incredibles in it.
Yeah, I'm super stoked for it. I love the Lego games, and they're really good fun if you have... a friend to play with. The whole series is kind of worth getting. But I'm super excited for The Incredibles, and also they recently confirmed that it's got the story of Incredibles 2 in it, so this isn't just the first game. I say confirmed, it was in the trailer, but it's implied. Well, it's literally they have the Incredibles logo, and then it's like in Lego, and then it has the Incredibles logo in Lego, but it says 2 instead of 1.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so... It's in there. It looks cool. I'm excited to get it.
One concern I have about this is that one of the great things about the Lego games is there's a level of customization, because like one of the things you unlock is rare skins or rare costumes or rare characters that do cool stuff, and I don't know how much of that there's going to be in The Incredibles, especially if it's following the story of 2.
I think that's fair. I think like they usually in most of the games have an opportunity to customize the characters. They usually put some kind of character generator in there, so if you want to make your own character. I think like chances are it's going to kind of heavily borrow from the lore, if you like, of kind of all of the massive amount of superheroes that don't really exist in The Incredibles.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Because I think that's kind of what they'll have to do, because you're right in the sense that like in The Incredibles itself there's like 6 superheroes. I think. Yeah, something like that.
There's the family of 5 and like a couple of supporting characters.
Yeah, but the point is that like in the extended kind of like the past, there was loads more. So maybe they'll kind of borrow from that a little bit. Because you are right, as it stands, I'm unsure how they're going to have like the usual unlockable stuff that you get to the end of the game, then you go back and unlock things.
Well, the concern I have is that like if it's following the story of 2 very closely, that has my concern. If it were a more generic The Incredibles game, they could maybe open up to like other Pixar stuff, almost like a sort of Lego Pixar, but framed around The Incredibles, because that's like a story framework that works. But I don't know. I doubt they'll have the scope to do that or branch off to other franchises through the movie story. So I don't know. It'll be an interesting one to see. Okay, the next story, ladies and gentlemen, is that Fortnite this month has made more money off of its cosmetic editions than PUBG has sold in copies. Thoughts?
It just shows how big Fortnite's getting, especially because I think it's become, we talked about it before, it's become quite big with kids, as far as we're aware. It's kind of quite a big deal, and I think kids are more likely to get their parents to kind of spend on small things like skins, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons why this has been driven, because in terms of, say, numbers of users, it's not a huge difference between the two.
Right.
So you wouldn't expect like kind of microtransactions to be such a big deal in terms of like more than the sales. So maybe that's why. But yeah, like Fortnite's kind of got no kind of signs of slowing down at the moment. So
I mean, you got to give them. Fortnite was a genius idea to take PUBG, a massive gaming success, and make a kid-friendly version that a parent who doesn't really care about can look at and go, "Oh, it's like cartoony. That's fine." That's really smart.
Well, especially considering they turned like the assets that they already had into a completely different game, and so obviously we talk about Fortnite, as you say before, it's Fortnite Battle Royale here, as opposed to the full price Fortnite game that's kind of been left on the side because this Battle Royale has done so well.
Do you know what's a real shame is when they announced Fortnite years and years ago, I thought that's a brilliant idea for a game, and it's kind of a shame that like that game has been left alone.
Yeah, totally. It's a bit of one of those cases that's like the GTA 5 DLC. Something
Yeah,
done so
absolutely.
well elsewhere that it becomes kind of, is it worth the company even doing anything about it?
Will we ever see them go back? Yeah, that is interesting. All right, next up this week is that. So, I've got 3 here. 12th. I'm gonna go God of War, Borderlands, Vivendi because I feel like Vivendi's a meaty topic. All right. The next piece of news, ladies and gentlemen, is that the God of War embargo has been revealed, and it's super early. With the game coming out on the 20th of this month, 420, the embargo launches on the 12th of April, more than a week beforehand. That seems pretty confident on Sony's part.
Yeah, so they have previously done this, I think, with Uncharted 4 and Horizon Zero Dawn.
I also want to say they did it with Knack.
Did they?
I want to say so. Let me check that.
It might just, in fairness, it might be their general way that they deal with things. But it's a very consumer-friendly way of dealing with things, and it's a very, as you say, confident, because you kind of could just, like, if you got bad reviews at this stage a week before, then you're talking people cancelling their pre-orders, you're talking kind of people changing their minds about something. I think, talking about something like Sea of Thieves, if that had had its reviews out so early, then I do think it would have a massive effect on sales.
Oh no, Knack was a couple of days before.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so it's a very ballsy move because it allows like a full news cycle before you even release your game. So everyone who's interested enough to look it up is going to find out.
It is fascinating because from like a PR department side of things, it's a fucking terrible move. Like it's really not smart to release a major piece of information that people will be waiting for about your game a week beforehand. That puts a huge amount of impetus on the marketing department to be talking about it and pushing it in the same way for a whole week. That's tough.
I think like it just shows kind of how confident you need to be, though. We have to assume that Sony is fairly confident about this being one of the biggest games this year, and I think that's the only way that you like. You would only do this, as you say, it's a terrible move, in terms of like, if you didn't know that this was going to be big, then you wouldn't ever possibly do it because it could destroy your sales.
The other thing that I'm fascinated by is we've heard a couple of times now that pre-orders for this are down.
Oh yeah?
We've heard a couple of times that they're not that they're down, so to say, but they're kind of underperforming. That God of War is not pre-ordered where people thought it would be. My source for that, I believe, from a couple of months ago, is Colin Moriarty, who's like quite close to Santa Monica. He's like a game journalist dude. Don't really follow him much anymore, but yeah, a couple of months ago he talked about that, which I think is really interesting. So maybe the good reviews are a way to push out final pre-orders. Maybe like if they're
I could see that. I do think that might have changed since that was in January, and it might have changed since then. But I do think that maybe that is part of the move, is that they have a lot to convince because people who have played the old games might not necessarily be attracted to this new game. It's very different thematically to how the old games were. And in terms of style and presentation, it's not like a clear follow-on. However, maybe you're right. Maybe doing this, if they can get the reviews out and the reviews are high, just like they want, then they can maybe start convincing some people who maybe wouldn't have been convinced otherwise. Because I can see why it would be soft-based at the moment, especially when you've got a lot to convince people. But I think by the time that we start seeing the reviews, if it's positive, then that will change.
Okay, second final piece of news this week. Take this with the biggest pinch of salt you possibly can. We're talking classic Italian restaurant serving you meatballs, pinch of salt. Borderlands 3 may have been leaked. If the leak is to be confirmed, Lewis, myself and you were talking earlier this year about how we expect it to be a loot box filled online service, massive worry point for us, right?
Yes.
It's none of those things.
Okay.
If the leak is to be believed, now that's why I say take this with a massive pinch of salt. Gearbox are known to be not exactly the most upstanding of games publishers and developers in the industry. They've had some foibles before. But if the leak is to be believed, it's basically exactly what we wanted. It's multiple planets and spaceships in between. There is a story mode, which is the core part of what Borderlands is. It's multiple co-op again. The story takes place over Pandora and Elpis and another planet, which is Pandora's moon. It's exciting, and it's named Borderlands 3 rather than like a subtitle or anything like that. With a reveal at E3 and a release this year.
I will believe it when I see it.
I agree with you. I am highly skeptical, but I'm also slightly semi.
Yeah, I think like if it is all of those things, I would be very happy. But I do think that we've kind of heard that 2K. I do think Borderlands 3 is going to be not a good game. In terms of like, if it's like what you say, then yeah, I'll get it. But I do worry so much for that game, especially from 2K, with their current stance on things.
Yeah, it's. Yes. It's really tough because Randy Pitchford, who's making the game, who's the head publisher on the game, has come out quite publicly and said, I don't want this to be this kind of industry. I want to push for games to be a hobby, not a service. And I have huge respect for that, especially from him, who is known to be one of the biggest foiblers in the industry. Go back and look at the stuff that happened with Aliens versus Aliens Colonial Marines. It was a mess, and he was a mess at the time. And for him to come out and say something so genuinely upstanding in the industry at the minute, which is a sad sentence in itself, but I feel like with a stance like that, as a producer, that's a good thing. At the same time, it's a lot easier for a person to say on their Twitter, I believe this, and a company to say something different. So, I don't know, we'll see what happens, but who knows?
Yeah.
And finally this week, and easily one of the best pieces of news that's happened in the gaming industry, potentially for a while, Ubisoft is no longer fighting off an aggressive takeover from Vivendi. Basically what they did was they agreed a deal between Vivendi and I believe it was Tencent Media?
Yes, that's right.
Tencent Media, they're a Chinese developer, right?
Yeah, they're the main person that the agreement's been made with, but there have also been a few different organizations that have bought little parts of Ubisoft from Vivendi.
So they agreed with these companies, mainly again Tencent, but apparently, according to Lewis, a bunch of others as well, to buy a bunch of Vivendi's shares so that Vivendi would make a great deal of profit on the shares they bought from Ubisoft already, which was the way that they were going about taking over Ubisoft. They were aggressively buying shares to sort of chump up the percentage of Ubisoft they owned. So now Tencent and a bunch of other companies now own those shares in a small enough percentage each that they don't own a significant chunk of Ubisoft and they can't have significant push on their dealings, but that Vivendi is out of the picture entirely. There are two things on this, I would say. Lewis, what were your thoughts immediately on this?
I'm really happy about it. I think while being bought off by someone else isn't necessarily the best of news, it's still good to see them kind of escape the clutches a little bit. Something evil. Evil's a strong word, but not something that was kind of good for us. I do think that in many ways Ubisoft has kind of clawed back their image recently. We talked about this in general, but kind of 2012, 2013, Ubisoft were at their like peak. They had an amazing E3, and then all of those games turned out to be a bit worse. And it was during this time that Vivendi started to be more and more on the advance. I do think that Ubisoft have managed to kind of save that recently with Origins and with changing some of those old games into better games. I'm hoping that we kind of see another rise of Ubisoft,
So my immediate response to this was, good, that's a great thing. Vivendi are not awful compared to some developers and publishers, but they're not great either, and they're certainly not, like, technically this means that Ubisoft is still independent. Like, they still develop and publish their own stuff, and it's weird to think of them as an indie developer, because I suppose at this point they're not. They're sort of owned in part by so many companies and propped up by so many companies and agreements, but they do entirely develop and publish, which is a good thing, and you don't really want Vivendi or that kind of company at the head of that thing. I do worry that this will stop Ubisoft from pushing as hard as they've had to. in a way, because of the Venditti takeover, Ubisoft have really, really had to keep on players' side. And they've managed to do this by like still pushing gold editions and season passes and this, that, the other. So they've still not been a perfect developer, but they have done really well. And I think to some extent, there's an argument to be made that it's forced their hand on stuff like Beyond Good and Evil, and it's forced their hand on like Far Cry 5 being so revolutionary on the Assassin's Creed, well, not revolutionary, but being so different on the Assassin's Creed reboot. I wonder if under the same pressure we would have seen them making those changes. I hope that they see how successful they've been over the last few years and keep going, and I kind of believe they will do, because Yves Guillemot will still be at the top of the company, so it's his leadership that will still push forward. But I could kind of see them slipping a bit.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think like I have like a wonderful graph to show you about the advance of Ubisoft, but it is like they were pushed into making these kind of good changes. They were pushed away from kind of conventional microtransactions, and you do feel that when you play like a kind of when you compare something like Unity to Assassin's Creed Origins, you can kind of feel the changes that they had to make.
Oh, really?
Well, you know, like originally, Unity was kind of, you know, you haven't paid to open this box for every box in the entire game.
That is true.
Like, I don't know what they were thinking with that one, but yeah. But then they didn't put those in. They made it was a lot better, and I do think you're right in the sense that we don't really want to see them decline again. I do think maybe that's something that a lot of companies need to go through, is this kind of cycle. I think something like mentioning 2K again, I do think maybe they could do with having like this whole slump so that they can then rise and be kind of good.
Rise.
Yeah.
But either way, Ubisoft are saved for now, and that is a genuinely wonderful thing. Speaking of genuinely wonderful things, God of War is coming out in a couple of weeks, and it seems to be a major, major step forward for a franchise that was arguably struggling a bit. Not only is it a great step forward for a fairly beloved franchise at this point, it's a seriously hefty IP and a seriously hefty looking game for the biggest console at the minute, PlayStation 4. One of the things that's driving it forward is its ability to take a more mature take on gaming, a more mature take on the way it did stories before, with its new dynamic between Kratos and his son, or the child in the video game. I'm still not sure whether it's his son, I'll say that outright. But with a sort of parent dynamic. Though there's lots of ways that games have taken on mature storylines, so we thought that this week, in a celebration of what God of War will be, we hope when it releases later this month, we would talk about some of the games that we would like to see adopt a similar or a more mature approach to their storyline. Lewis, this was inspired by you, so tell me, what is it that you want to see?
This is where you think that I would have prepared for this. But no, there's many things that I would like to see kind of... We're talking about a kind of series that are kind of dead or maybe not as active as they used to be. And have like a big tonal shift, you know. So to be specific, God of War was very much this wild and crazy action game. Mm-hmm. Whereas this looks like it's going to be more like a big, deep story game. And I think that's really quite positive, you know. I think for me, like, there's so many things that I would bring back. But if I was going to choose one, there might be a bit of a weird one because it'd be interesting, but something like Time Splitters.
That's a great shout.
Yeah. Something like Time Splitters. I think like that's a game that tried to do a story and tried to do kind of first-person shooting back in a time when, to be honest, even both of those things were fairly new. And like, I think if we could bring it into the present and make something that's a bit deeper, something that's kind of like, there's been lots of praise for, say, Titanfall 2's storyline, something that you can merge the first-person shooter and have a really good story. And I think like that's something that I'd like to see as something like a more mature, taking it away from maybe the kooky and the crazy, but making it something that's actually stands up against these other games.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great idea. Time Splitters is a it's a franchise with like really deep roots in the gaming industry, and it's one of those ones that like you can compare it to God of War and the kind of whoa kooky crazy gameplay it had before, and you can kind of see it working. No, that's a good shout. My one is from slightly left field. Mine is Crash Bandicoot.
Okay.
April Fools. No, I think mine is I don't want to say it like this, but kind of the obvious one for Xbox. I want to see this for Halo. When the first game came out, Halo was a really big leader in story and in story-driven gameplay, and I kind of feel it's a shame that the series is a caricature now of what it was. Like, Halo 3 was a fairly important game for a lot of people, especially story-wise, and they've had an opportunity to do stuff like this with characters and their relationships before, and I feel like they've kind of let the side down. Halo 5 was fascinating because it looked like it was going to be this really interesting, heavily story-driven, multiple character affair that was going to be so much deeper than, and it came out and it wasn't. And it says something that a lot of people felt disappointed because they wanted it to be that rather than what it came out to be. So I think Halo absolutely should go down this route. I'd be totally in for a deeper, darker Halo that maybe deals with the fallout of Cortana or the other characters, or I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of ways you could take that franchise and do right by it.
Yeah, definitely. So I have an answer that you're going to hate.
Okay.
So this is one that's kind of interesting. We've already talked about this game today, just to get you excited.
I feel like I know where you're going.
So Borderlands, I think so. There's differing opinion on this. The first game was this kind of dark and maybe slightly dull game, I guess. The second game kind of reinvented itself and made everything kind of a bit crazy and a bit kooky, and I think it kind of went too far. I think there's a lot of distaste in the gaming industry for that kind of stuff at the moment. And like, I think that while Borderlands 2 and say the pre-sequel were both great games, I do think that the humor inside in them maybe like overstayed its welcome a little bit. I would personally kind of like it to kind of go a little bit darker and a little bit less kooky. I think really the games that we're talking about here in general are games that either tried and failed to be really good story games, used to be really good story games, or this one that I kind of say is things that are kind of trying too hard to be wacky. And I think Borderlands 2 for me, while I love the game, is trying too hard to be like this wacky, crazy story. And I really would like to see Borderlands 3 try to be a little bit different from that and try and be a little bit more mature, a little bit more adult. But I know that you're going to say that you want exactly the opposite.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I agreed with you. I think it's fascinating. I think it'd be interesting, and I think you are oh so wrong. I don't know. To me, what made Borderlands was not just like the. I kind of understand what you mean about the humor overstaying its welcome. It's a very immature game, and it doesn't hide it in any way. But I think if you went down that route, you'd have to do a lot of work to keep like the vibrancy of it. And I feel like what made it was like you could really tie certain characters and storylines to certain areas and aesthetics, and I like that it does that. So I think I'd be interested to see it if it still felt like a Borderlands game at the end of the day, and I think that would be a very fine line to tread. Mine is my second one is one that's never going to happen ever. It's GTA. I think that GTA 5 is a great game because of the world and because of the actual game you play in and the mechanics of it. The story is very good, but I don't quite feel like it's like the best GTA story there is. And I think one of the reasons of it is because like the heists thing had like an ever expanding craziness level to it. Like the end heist had to be so much more than just a bank job. But because of that, the character stories ramped up as well, and so they kind of got a bit lost by the end. Like they became a bit too generically GTA to be interesting. And as a game overall, like it's a mess now. Like it's a fun mess. It's online still has some really great stuff in it. I've kind of fallen out of love with it, but it's a great mess. But like there's DeLoreans and Batmobiles and lots of shit that feels very out of place. And I feel like what they were starting to do with GTA and moved away from very quickly was establish this kind of Easter egg driven, very like intense player focused thing where the hardest of the hardcore were picking stuff up. And then online started, people found that actually the shallowest of the hardcore were picking stuff up, and that was the way they went forward. But I love the old San Andreas model where there was actually shit in that game that you had to look for. And if you looked for and found, there was another layer and level of something for you to enjoy. And I'd kind of like them to go, like, especially with the next one, if they're returning to Vice City or somewhere else in San Andreas or Liberty City, I'd love there to be something more than just the base level story in there. There's a base level story that's fine and you can enjoy it and blow buses up or whatever. But if you want to, like, know the world like the back of your hand, there's something in there for you.
Yeah. I get exactly where you come from, and I do think you're right to say that something like in the traditional San Andreas, like there were things that you had to find in that game. It still had the kooky things, but it wasn't kind of driven by money. And you are right. Like I think the kind of story where it didn't really, the characters didn't really develop in a certain way, and like towards the end of GTA, it ends very quickly.
Yeah.
I remember kind of going, oh, I'm at the last mission and I have to do this all of a sudden. And I chose the wrong decision. But I think for me, like, I have an interesting one in the sense that I would like to see Saints Row go back to it being something darker. And like, we talk about GTA, but something very relevant, I guess, would be like how Saints Row went on this kooky path until it kind of reached a peak. And I think I would like to see something that's a little bit more darker, a little bit more mature, and kind of not return exactly, but like more what its roots were about. Was like an alternative GTA, which was trying to do something else. But then it kind of went and got a bit distracted with crazy stuff. I'd like to see a return to form or a return to something that's a little bit more adult. It would look very different. I don't think like everyone would be kind of onto it straight away. It would be one of these ones where like in God of War, like the old fans wouldn't necessarily buy it. But I do think that I probably would like something that's a bit more an alternative GTA, but not quite as crazy or quite as like trying too hard.
So I wholeheartedly agree with you. I was going to pitch Saints Row, but I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'd love to see a gritty Saints Row, like a proper gang warfare, more like Saints Row 1 or 2 Saints Row. But I also feel like Saints Row started something that they didn't end properly. It was kind of an inside joke, but at the end of Saints Row, they teased like an Amelia Earhart story. And I'd really like to see them do that. I'd like to see them take it like almost back in time and have the Saints mean something different. And like change the dynamic of who represents what and what they're doing, who the bad guys are, who the good guys are. I don't know. I'd like to see Saints Row not be about like aliens and hell and all that jazz, but it would be kind of cool to see them do, I guess, like Saints Row, somewhere between Saints Row 2 and 3, but in a different time period. Any final thoughts on this one? Any final ones from you?
So I have one completely left field suggestion.
Go for it.
So there's a bit of context, but I'll jump into it first. Mario. So the reason I say it is that like Shigeru Miyamoto, famous for being in charge of these games, is famous also for not really believing in games having stories.
Oh.
Yeah, so his kind of was strongly a believer in not giving a game a story just being like a medium for the game to actually begin, if you like. Mm-hmm. It's why a lot of kind of Mario games start with kind of a 3-second scene where Princess gets captured. So he's on record saying it. And recently, kind of that's obviously changed, and the people that are in charge of it now look like they're more interested in taking kind of some of the classic Nintendo games and adding more to them, or making them more than they originally were. And that's kind of one of the reasons why while we haven't really seen much in terms of story, we have seen a lot more in terms of different styles of gameplay. That's one of the reasons why obviously Breath of the Wild is a much different game from previous Zelda games, and the same with Super Mario Odyssey. So I would like to see, honestly, like Mario try and have like a proper story. I think it could be really interesting, a bit weird, but really interesting to see what they could do with it.
Yeah,
Maybe bring back the RPG, Super Mario RPG.
that'd be great. You went in saying like it's kind of left field, and you're not wrong, but it'd be pretty good. Like, the one thing I guess that Mario's got nailed down is gameplay, is mechanics like that. And so, yeah, I'd love to see something like Super Mario. Can't believe I've forgotten what it's called. Odyssey, Super Mario Odyssey, but with like a heavy driven storyline to connect you from place to place.
Yeah, I think like it's something that I think like there aren't many people that are really good at merging really good stories with really good games, and I think like Nintendo are famous for making really good games, but they don't really do much in the story department.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be amazing to see something from them that managed to do both of these things, and really kind of would make a really big success of those games.
I agree. Wholeheartedly agree. Before we move on to our saying goodbye to you this week, it's time for my monthly desperately ranting at you to try something. In the name of stuff being given a heavier story thing, I'm gonna. You're already smirking. You know what's coming. I'm going to implore you, if you have picked up this game before or haven't picked it up, please give Pokemon Go a try over the next week. Pokemon Go basically just got a story mode. It's not a story mode in the same way that it's a dedicated single player thing. You will have to go out into the world, you will have to do raids, all that kind of jazz, but it contextualizes it. It gives you cool discoveries about Pokemon. It gives you hard tasks that are really fun and satisfying when you complete them. It is genuinely something that the game hasn't had before, and I think a lot of people deserve to play it, because I reached a milestone in it this afternoon that was some of the most satisfying video games I've had since the start of this year. So go pick it up if you want to. It's free. Why wouldn't you? And if you don't, I don't know. Have a good weekend, I guess. All right, Lewis, what will you be playing this week?
So currently I'm playing through Dark Souls 2 and Demon Souls. I'm trying to do like a casters only, as opposed to, instead I always play melee in these games, so now I'm only magic, no attacks at all.
Nice.
And that's kind of interesting. And I'm watching Crystal play through Ni no Kuni too.
Ooh, I've heard good things about that.
Yeah, it's really good. I think we'll be talking about it at the end of the year.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's one of those games.
I don't think it'll be exclusive at the end of the year.
Ah, that could be interesting.
You should be playing the free games that are coming out on your console this month. For PlayStation, the highlight is Mad Max, but if you've got an Xbox, the highlight is The Witness, which was given our Game of the Year a couple of years ago. And don't smirk at that, you agreed.
I was supposed to. It was out of talk for another hour.
The Witness, which was given our Game of the Year last year, a couple of years ago, an Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which might not be the best Assassin's Creed, but it's free.
Free Assassin's Creed, come on.
If you have gold. So those are three really great games that you should give a try if you have those services. And if you don't, you can usually get those services for a lot cheaper than the cost of those games anyway. So if you've thought about playing them both, there's a great way to buy it. Cool. I'm going to be hopefully finishing Pokemon Go Story Mode this week, although there's a lot to do, so maybe not. And then I'm going to be playing Far Cry a bunch.
Nice.
Because I got Far Cry 5 this week. I'm loving it so far. That's one of the games that's had a real... Far Cry 5 is a big story-driven game. This one is very story. Very good. And also, I'm going to be putting the finishing touches on our Brigitte review this week. So you can check out Brigitte on our Facebook page, which is the new Overwatch hero. There's also maybe going to be a Pokemon video on the channel, and I'm going to review the shirt I'm wearing right now, which is a Overwatch League shirt, because there aren't many reviews online and people need to know if it's good quality fabric, which it is. I've got to put it somewhere. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. We are going to head off into the wild green yonder. Have a lovely week. And until next week, the game's up.